Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, and best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to learn how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm happy to have as my guest, Lee Coulter, Senior Transformation Advisor at Blue Prism. Lee and I will be discussing key trends in the market related to intelligent automation and the opportunity for companies to embrace automation as a core transformational competency. Lee, welcome to the podcast. Please tell us more about yourself.
Thanks, Brad. I'm pretty excited about this. This is an area I am hugely passionate about, and my career kind of reflects that. I'm unpredictably in this chair today, and we'll say a thing about that as well. But I've been in 8 industries. I've started 5 companies, sold 2 of those, lived in China, lived in Brazil, worked for GE, Aon, Kraft, Ascension, really a wide variety of companies. And my world, Brad, has been about technology-fueled transformation. I'm the build and transform guy. I'm not the run and maintain guy. That's just not what floats my boat. And so I've taken things that I've done and the core of how to transform from industry to industry, region to region, and it's really proved to be fairly applicable regardless of the context that we're in. And now I find myself, I spent a decade most recently at Ascension. I started a BPO and an automation services business, one some of the viewers may have heard of, Agilify. And then I find myself at Blue Prism, and I was customer number 11 for Blue Prism way back in the day when Pat Geary was my sales guy. That's an exaggeration, but not far from it. And we're doing some really interesting stuff here at Blue Prism, really focusing on what I'm going to say is a very importantly nuanced understanding of what we mean when we say digital transformation or enterprise transformation. We're working on something that we call Project X, which is a little E, enterprise, and a big X, transformation. This is stuff that I'm super passionate about, that I really love, and I'm excited to get into it.
Lee, I'm really glad to have you on the show today and eager to get your point of view on a number of topics. I'd like to start by hearing your perspective on what's happening in intelligent automation in the marketplace. So maybe you could just talk about some key trends that you've observed over the past couple of years.
This is really important, and I'm going to give just a little bit of background. If you haven't read the groundbreaking paper from the world's most successful futurist, Ray Kurzweil, The Law of Accelerating Returns, it really describes what's happening here and the notion of recombinant innovation. So if you look at any of the components of our technology tool bench today, whether it's natural language processing, natural language generation, OCR, IDP, RPA, machine learning, AI-enabled chatbot, the list just goes on and on. And if you dive one layer down into that, you find that each of these technologies has been on its own 50 to 100-year journey of innovation. If you can believe it, the first patent for optical character recognition is over 100 years old. That's important to understand when you look at how capable and how long have we had the ability to talk to our phones. Look it up. It's not as long as you might think. And so what's happened here is in the last 24 to 36 months, we have multiple individual technologies that each of which have crossed really crucial thresholds of utility. That means that the quality, ease of use, cost, effectiveness, and fit for purpose has reached a level that is a step change from where it was 5 years ago. And so that's one dynamic. And we're now seeing another trend is platformification, which I created the word, and hopefully it resonates with some folks. But the notion is that it's like having a Leatherman tool as opposed to carrying a toolbox around, and they're all connected. These tools, the ability to interconnect them and use them as a suite is dramatically different than it's ever been before. And it really makes a major difference in the ease of consumption. And we'll come back to that because the relative ease or difficulty in consumption of these is not the technology. You probably would not be surprised if I said the tech is actually the easy part. There's a whole host of other things that make it the hard part. Now, what else I think that is a big trend that's going on, which is not necessarily visible, but if you look at what I consider to be the very time-tested Gartner hype curve and Gartner adoption curve, it's pretty easy to put ourselves on those curves. But we had an environmental accelerant. Somebody literally poured gasoline on our curve as we had to mobilize and remote 800 million workers worldwide had to be enabled to work from someplace else generally. And this caused, and heretofore we've never seen any sort of forced adoption of a technology like this. And the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars that went into the technologies that enable us to do what we're doing right here today. And so these are, in and of themselves, each of these is interesting and has accelerating and exponential elements. And then you smush them together, and now you've got the Great Resignation, you've got declining birth rates, you've got a new set of expectations from what people want at work. We have technology that is accelerated in its utility, and those are some of the major trends. And the last one I want to make sure to point out here is the desirability. So some recent studies have shown that it's almost a complete reversal. 90% of people thought the bots were coming to take my job in 2016 and 2017. And the exact reverse is the case. In a recent survey, 86% of people said, why isn't my company letting me use automation? Because there's a bunch of digital drudgery that I'm forced to do that I want to offload to my friendly digital laborer. This is a complete shift. So these are trends, each of which by itself would be interesting and in combination are just fascinating.
And Lee, why is it so important for companies to take note of these trends? Maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, so taking note of a trend is very interesting because now you're beginning to bring in the notion of the human psyche and our ability to observe and engage with things that are moving on an exponential scale. So for 600,000 years, our brains have been wired and reinforced to see things on a linear scale. What I saw for the last this is the way the brain works. What I saw over the last 6 weeks, I straight line for the next 12 to 18 months. That's the human condition. Well, you can't. This is moving way too fast. And when we look at the last 6 weeks, we don't really contemplate that there were a lot of exponential announcements made and things that happened. I saw a statistic recently, 92% of the entire world's information was created in the last 24 months. That is just absolutely mind-boggling. So it takes intention. It takes deliberate attention, Brad, to pay attention to this. And it requires you to engage with the data. This is not something that a casual observation and looking at your BI set of charts is going to tell you. This requires real intentionality to see these trends moving at this speed. So what I have said to folks is you need to make a study of studying the data so that you can understand how quickly this is moving. You know, and we've heard the stories, right? We know the Kodak story, we know the Blockbuster Netflix story, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, Airbnb became the largest hotelier in 36 months. This is an indication, again, of the pace with which things are changing and those being disrupted or those leading disruption, the pace at which it's occurring. And so this is, for me, I guess, the call to arms for folks to pay really close attention. And that doesn't mean do more of same paying attention. It means engage with the data and understand what's happening here and evaluate what that means for your enterprise.
Lee, I'd like to also get your perspective on another hot topic in intelligent automation, which is scaling.
Yeah.
So even though you and I know the benefits of intelligent automation are pretty spectacular, why are most businesses not scaling their automation capability?
This is an area that I've spent a lot of time studying, and this is an interesting dynamic So there's several things at play here. First and foremost is let's talk about where IA got its start. How did it get a foothold in the companies in which it's operational today? Well, typically because there was some radical leader somewhere in the business who saw this stuff and saw the potential, and by hook or by crook, got this technology into their enterprise. And if you remember, 5, 7 years ago, right, all of the data was about this is a fad, this is not enterprise
Right.
grade, it's brittle, it's going to go away, and Microsoft could wipe it off the face of the planet in 5 seconds if they wanted to. Well, Microsoft's in the automation business now, along with many others, and it is now called the fastest growing class of enterprise software in human history. So the one component is the not invented here component and where the technology entered the enterprise. It didn't enter from a boardroom conversation. It wasn't an ERP initiative with a 7-year, 10-year business case, multi-billion-dollar returns. That does not describe IA initiatives today. It should. We'll talk about a little bit later. So one is the entry point and its level of spread in the organization. And it really comes down to individual social mapping. Okay, this leader knew that one. And so the chief accounting officer talked to the customer care VP. And so there was a spread there. And then there's also like, how did IT look at this? IT likes to own stuff like this, but this is best owned by business people. So how did the cultural acceptance from an IT and business perspective relate to the absorption? So that's, if you will, the ground level, and the notion of COEs, which is another thing where IA typically is living now, is in a COE. And where is that placed? Does it report to the board? Probably not. Should it? Probably should, as part of a larger enterprise transformation program, but we'll come back to that as well. So the question was about scaling. And several dynamics provided an asymptote of progress to scaling automation. And one of them is the tooling itself and the support necessary to do tactical automation. There are amazing stories of amazing results that we've produced with RPA in a relatively tactical way. And so we hear a lot of stories about, we've done all of that. We've done all of the tactical automation. And what's happening now is, if you look at the way that we approached use cases, Brad, we took an end-to-end process and we chopped it up into bits and pieces, like Fruit Ninja, right? Literally chopped this thing up. And everywhere that there was unstructured data, we stopped before it, picked it up after. If there was a conversation, if there was a chat, if there was an email, if there was a contact center intervention, a document, the list just goes on. And that meant a lot of friction in trying to decompose and reassemble processes when you have exempted pieces of this. I mentioned a minute ago that the level of utility of things like natural language processing and intelligent document processing, among many other UDP tools, unstructured data processing tools, has just come light years. So we've seen a case of automation did not rise to a board level conversation. Many organizations have not yet paired the IA with their digital transformation, have not yet merged the business and IT. And I hate to use this in a time of pandemic, but the virility of the spread of IA has been limited for these reasons. And now we could also talk about culture, desirability, strategic transformation, and whether or not an organization is structured for sustained multi-year initiatives. In order to do that, executives have to be incented in their long-term bonuses. It's just that simple.
Right.
If you want to see energy, applied over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, people do not do what they're told to do. They do what they're paid to do. And I guarantee you people pay very close attention to that.
So Lee, let's now transition to talking about what's happening in business, or you could say just the global economy in general. What are the biggest changes that you see taking place in the workforce? You've talked about the Great Resignation, but what else do you see happening?
So there are a couple of things that when I say them, somebody will be like, oh yeah, I remember reading about that. I heard about that. I saw a little blurb on that. Birth rates. Let's just pause for a minute on birth rates in developed economies. Half of Europe is shrinking. Japan has been shrinking for some period of time. If you look at China, believe it or not, their single child practices have left them with a shrinking workforce. There are just fewer people to do work, and the world of global enterprise needs to consume more work. So we've got this generalized dynamic of new labor entering the labor market, the human labor market. So that's one thing that's been going on. Now add COVID, and we've got two things that I call the Great Isolation and the Great Resignation. The Great Isolation was, I mentioned earlier, 800 million people working from home, all kinds of different expectations, different ways of living and existing and working, totally changed people's expectations, desires, and wants with respect to the work that they want to do. And is reflected in the fact that, now approaching 90% of workers said, yeah, give me some automation tools because there's some stuff I really don't want to do. Take the robot out of me. So these are a couple of major elements. And then we have a fight for talent. And if this doesn't apply uniformly across the labor force globally, but in a very non-trivial number of fields, I don't know, digital transformation, automation, graphic design, user experience, right? There's a whole host of talents that are essential to what we're doing to transform ourselves. Those labor markets have just completely changed, right? People have pulled out of full-time employment. The gig economy, this is fantastic. The gig economy is growing at 17.4% and is anticipated to continue or accelerate. So 17 to now, it's been 17.4%. And that's expected to continue or accelerate through 2027. If you look at the numbers, the CAGR grows, it's a big number if you look at the number of people participating in that gig economy. Well, they have different expectations. And we now see that workers are beginning to have an influence on their employees. If we look at some of the things that have happened with big tech, if we look at diversity and inclusion, it has changed. No question, the labor market has changed. And it's really interesting. Wait, we've got this little digital labor thing over here. Wait, it's not so little at all. And the timing is remarkable, Brad. It's remarkable.
And Lee, you mentioned earlier about the perception of RPA changing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do most companies now view RPA as a core part of their enterprise?
So the data would say we're at about half and half in terms of those who have installed it at some level on a permanent basis. So where it's been installed and what its charter is, what level of influence it has, what level of visibility it's given is variable. What we do know, as we look at data from digital transformation, and we really cast some nuances into that term here, it's like artificial intelligence. It means nothing unless you say it means something. So not surprisingly, success with digital transformation almost exactly replicates success with ERP, success with enterprise applications, success with offshoring and BPO. Weirdly, these things have very similar components to them. And it's a growing trend for automation to be installed into the enterprise. Right now, IA is finding a home and organizations are very different in terms of how they think about their digital transformation or office of transformation and IT. Sometimes those are commingled, sometimes they're not. Same thing with IA. Sometimes they're separate as a tripod, sometimes they're all in one. But we're seeing a shift of greater embracing and visibility and importance.
And Lee, what kind of an impact are digital native disruptors having in the market?
You can kind of imagine, given smart, energetic individual or group of people a blank sheet of paper and say, how would you do this? And I'll just use Rocket Mortgage as the example. A mortgage in 24 hours. Are you kidding me? This literally is what would have been just radically impossible. and yet it exists. And why wasn't it banks created the most successful global payment platforms instead of PayPal and Wise? Because digital native disruptors are not saddled by a whole bunch of things that we would call constraints. They don't sink into the soul. They're not part of the coloring of the way that we see the world. And of course, the speed with which you can structure and deliver a new business. There are some videos and some books about the four-person, $10 billion enterprise. So this is not a new idea, the ability to assemble all of the components of enterprise architecture in order to perform business, and to do so without actually contributing anything specifically to the business, but by intelligent assembly of the building block components. The I don't have to deal with legacy piece is enormous, right? Because it's a cost. And more important, this is fascinating, more important to an enterprise than the cost of maintaining that legacy is that having all of the people who care and feed the legacy, they are bringing a particular view of the world anchored in legacy, which has a cultural impact, which for decision-making and positions of power, folks that are anchored in legacy are often those same folks who are in a position of power for decision-making in today. So the cost of that legacy is far greater than just the fact that you're paying a lot of money to maintain that legacy operation, that legacy system, that legacy piece of whichever. The disruptors don't have that. And that's a really important distinction on top of those that I think most people think of in terms of digital disruptors.
Okay, so we've discussed what's happening with intelligent automation. We've discussed what's happening in business. Now let's talk about what this means for automation more broadly. Lee, how does intelligent automation play a key role in digital transformation?
So now I'm going to take just a moment and talk about digital transformation, because I think it's an important context to set. So most often when you hear the term digital transformation, it is, I'm committed to using digital technologies to go transform a thing in my business. When I say those words, that is not what I mean. When I say those words, what I mean is an organization who has made a declared public decision to be different as an organization, to embrace digital and technology integration as just a way we do everything. If you remember, Brad, in the 80s and 90s, the quality revolution that nearly killed American automakers. And Jack Welch was very famous for Six Sigma is in the blood of G leaders and whatever. But what's notable there is that it wasn't about using Six Sigma to do things. It was about the fact that the company had become an organization that embraced quality. And it's the same sort of thing. When I talk about digital transformation, it is organizations that have embraced digital. That's digital labor, digital experience, expectations of digital speed, quality, agility, a whole bunch of things that live in there. So what's happening with IA and digital transformation is they're just two facets of the same prism, like that, through that prism analogy in there. But really, they're just facets of the prism. When you put light through it, you get a spectrum out of it. You could argue that Lotus 1, 2, 3 was RPA for accounting 30 years ago. We've got new terms for it, and they're obviously far more sophisticated and capable of transforming work. But what we're seeing is businesses are taking automation and considering it just one of several core competencies in a transformation office. And I want to separate those two. I made the point earlier, but one is a transformation office, which goes and transforms parts of business, changes processes. And there's one that is concerned with cultural embedment of digital, of being a digital company. And we don't have enough time today to dive all the way into that, but I want to draw the distinction. So maybe in another time we can talk more about what does it mean to be embedded.
Lee, has digital labor become analogous to offshoring or BPO, in your opinion?
Brad, if I could shout from the highest mountain and wave a flag and carry a bullhorn, I would. And I've been trying to stump on this for years, because the short answer is yes. And the size of the prize is phenomenal. I'm just going to dimensionalize it real quickly. So, and anybody can go and look these numbers up. These are not like hard to find numbers, but if you just say enterprise general and administrative cost as a percentage of total cost of a company, you're going to find out that while there's outliers, it's generally 25 to 30% of the total cost of running a business are the back office and G&A functions. Okay. So that's 25 to 30 cents of every dollar spent is spent on G&A functions. Let's pause there. Okay. Now let's go over here and say, what level of impact can digital labor have on the G&A functions, which is predominantly where automation has been playing. Yes, there's some front and mid office stuff going on as well, but predominantly automation has been focused on the heavy lifting of the G&A functions. And if we do some work fingerprinting, which is work that as a component of Project X that I've been leading the development of, which is a science-based approach to work decomposition for the purposes of understanding the ability and the activity necessary to perform a subtask. We can now map that to technologies and we have a point of view, and it's really not hard to get to, but basically 50 to 70% of the ability performing activity across the G&A functions can be performed by technology. So let's just do some quick math. 50 to 70% of 25 to 35%. That's 12.5 to 15% of the total cost. So a company that's sitting there with 4% margins could literally be 16% net income in 36 months if they make a real commitment to embracing digital labor and going all in. And I think we're going to see some haves and have-nots here. I think we're going to see folks that are like, wow, that's really big. And it will become a board level conversation, and it will have the level of importance of an ERP or other major operating model transformation. And the size of the prize is really material, and you get multiple benefits at the same time, right? Now I can think with a pure mind, parking many of my constraints off to the side about how I design work. We've got birth rates, great resignation, the great isolation, changing expectations, and I can actually design work. I can design jobs that are attractive, engaging, fulfilling, rewarding, advancing. I can actually design these. We have a need, and we try to cobble together some stuff that we think somebody would actually take the job, create a job description. In this world, we have an opportunity to rethink that. We obviously can disrupt quality, speed, availability, and a whole bunch of other things, leveraging automation as well. Digital labor has this threshold of utility, cost, capability, et cetera, of the IA technologies has passed an important threshold, which makes digital labor now a thing. It is a thing for enterprises to take into workforce planning and to really do the analysis. And Blue Prism will be bringing to market some things to help folks do that analysis and understand the implications to their enterprise on a science-based approach to look at what's possible there. So that's the longest possible winded way of saying it.
Based on all of that, do you think automation has yet earned a seat at the C-suite table?
It's a great question. We're standing on the edge, the precipice right there, looking out and across. And we're starting to see people carrying C-suite titles that include the word automation and transformation. And these are really important shifts in terms of, has it earned a seat at the table? My personal opinion is yes, it has, but that's it. My personal opinion. I think that we're in the early days, despite the fact that it now enjoys its own category in enterprise software, which is indicative of answering the question that you asked there. But I think it's had its own category for 2 years. So I'll call it a qualified yes.
Fair enough. So Lee, I'd like to wrap up our conversation by just talking about Project X that you're working on with Jet Turkoff, our Chief Customer Strategy and Transformation Officer. I know that you're working on developing a whole new approach to responsible, sustainable automation. What can you tell us about Project X as we close today?
Sure. Well, I'll give a couple of teasers. One is, and you mentioned it, in order for automation to be transformative, it has to be sustainable and it has to be responsible, right? We can't go around willy-nilly just automating stuff without regard to what it does to all of our people, what it does to the operation. And, if I did 100 last week, can I do 100 every week for the next 3 years? It has to be sustainable and it has to be responsible. And so part of what we're bringing in our Project X toolkit is how to think about that, how to analyze that, and then how to reimagine and redesign with those as principal design criteria. There's some complexity to tackling an enterprise transformation, and that's literally what Project X stands for. So the frame or the wrapper around it is a set of playbooks that lead you from strategy development and governance through workforce planning and transition through the work of process reengineering and reimagination, which is essential to this, and then into building the tech stacks that you need to do this stuff. And then finally, how do you manage operations when you now have the ability to, on a real-time basis, manage inbound work and send it to its most appropriate fulfillment resource, one of which is now a digital labor component. So that is what we're focused on, is how do we take all the stuff we learned with BPO, offshoring, ERP, and the quality transformation? What do we know about making enterprise transformations real? How do we update that to give that in a structured and orderly way while providing the technology that you need to produce these sophisticated capability stacks in a single platform? It sounds pretty big. I think there's some big ideas inside there, but that's in a nutshell what we're working on at Project X. And as you can tell, I'm not excited about any of it.
Definitely. Well, Lee, we do look forward to hearing more about that. That all sounds really intriguing and interesting. So let me just thank you for your time today. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate all of your thoughts and insights, and be well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Brad. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.